Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Wavelength.
Mental illness doesn't have to be a life sentence.
Alcohol addiction, abuse, misuse is the same all over the globe.
Sparking the combos about Adelaide.
So it made me feel very confident that if we did have it in the state, we were going to know about it.
You should be having.
There'll be guys that are trained, but they don't feel like they're good enough to take their shirt off.
Almost everyone is a culprit of doom scrolling. Anyone who has a mobile phone.
On Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I'm your host, David, and tonight I am joined by Jamie for the first time this year. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's good to be back.
How's your Fringe season going?
Oh, my Fringe season is going absolutely amazingly. I'm a big Fringe advocate.
Yes.
I'm working at this beautiful venue called the Queen's Theatre, which is awesome. I'm surrounded by cabaret and drag, and it's really fun.
Everything you want in the world must be so fulfilling. And you've got your own Fringe show too.
I do have my own Fringe show. I'm doing my first ever solo show, which I'm really excited about. It's a burlesque show.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about that. Thank you for the cheeky little plug. What's it called though?
It's called Hot Sauce Hotties. So it's at the Goodwood Theatre on Goodwood Road.
I'm so
Check
there.
it out.
I'm so there.
I'm so there. It's insane. Tonight on Wavelength, we're asking, should we be pre-ordering video games still? After most of the world got burnt by that disastrous rollout of the hotly anticipated game Cyberpunk 2077, we're wondering if a boycott is the way forward.
Wavelength is also going to explain the scandal currently rocking Canberra, but next we'll be chatting with the Young Australian of the Year. Super excited for that one. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having with David and Jamie this evening. So, Jamie, every year, one Aussie gets named the Young Australian of the Year on Australia Day. And this year, that person was someone from Adelaide.
I know, it was amazing. She's an incredible lady.
That person was called Isobel Marshall. She was recognised for her work helping women around the world by breaking down stigma with menstruation and providing greater access to hygiene products.
Yes, and she also co-founded a business here in Adelaide called TABOO with friend Eloise Hall. She's got an amazing story to tell, so Arj sat down with her and had a chat.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Period. Literally half the world's population has them. But for a number of reasons, there's still a massive stigma attached to this completely natural biological function. They're also the cause of ongoing disparity and gender inequality. I spoke to Isobel Marshall and Eloise Hall, two amazing young South Australians who have made a massive stride in educating people about period and reduce the impacts of period poverty. In 2017, they started up TABOO, a company that makes 100% organic tampons and pads, and where all the profits are donated to one girl, who educate girls in Sierra Leone and Uganda about feminine hygiene and help reduce the impact of period poverty. Isobel, on behalf of TABOO, also won Young Australian of the Year. Isobel, Eloise, you two are doing a lot of work to combat the stigma that women face when it comes to their menstrual cycle, also tackling the issue of period poverty. So if we can just start off with the latter, with period poverty, can you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, so period poverty is a term that really describes when a person can't afford or access menstrual products. So it comes in all shapes and sizes. In Australia, it more so looks like when people don't have the financial viability to buy products, then they use alternatives that aren't very dignified or won't let them attend school or work with certainty that those products are going to work. And we've found that the stigma of menstruation is very much feeding that period poverty. When someone doesn't feel comfortable with their period, they don't feel that it's something to be proud of, and in turn they feel really ashamed about their experience. They don't have the confidence to then ask for product or make it a demand with their family, or feel that they can go and find these products with the confidence that they need. So often the stigma of menstruation is feeding period poverty quite dramatically.
And what about overseas? What does period poverty look like there?
It looks like many different things. As Eloise said, menstrual stigma plays a major role. And it looks different in different cultures, communities, and countries as well. Often it will be period poverty will look like a woman or a girl not able to afford the product or not able to access the product. But then that education feeds into it as well. A lot of girls don't even know what periods are until they start bleeding between their legs, which is quite a frightening experience in itself. And then often they don't have the people to learn how to deal with their period properly. If they don't have the right products, they'll turn to things like mattress rippings, rags, even tree bark if they're in really impoverished circumstances. And that, of course, has a whole heap of then reproductive illness effects.
So in Australia, how bad would you say the stigma regarding women and their menstrual cycle is?
I think it does depend on, I guess, the culture that you grew up in, the family you grew up in. So a lot of families, thankfully, have parents or guardians that are comfortable with the conversation, and so a lot of kids grow up knowing exactly what a period is and they're quite comfortable having the conversation. But then you also have families that aren't very confident in that topic, and so a lot of these people will end up relying on their school systems to educate them. Thankfully, it's an expectation that schools have some method of educating people about menstruation, but often it's not all that they need, and sometimes that is the access to product is overlooked in that education as well. So stigma is still quite intense. I think every person in Australia who bleeds can relate to hiding your tampons in your shopping basket or coughing while you open up your pad, because it's something that people still aren't proud of.
Now, the government recently announced that it was going to make sanitary pads and tampons free in public schools from this year onwards, and then they're going to inject, I think it was $450,000 over the next 4 years. What does that mean to you guys?
We are really proud that SA government's done that. It's a really great initiative to keep people supported in schools, so these girls won't feel that they don't have to miss out because they know that there's product at their school. So that's going to literally change lives and the future of girls.
Yeah, and even for people who could afford product, like just the confidence that it's there and you don't have to take full responsibility for just what your body does. It's like toilet paper. Like if we had to bring toilet paper with us to school every day that we needed it, that's just a responsibility that should be, I guess, on the shoulders of the people that are in charge of that space.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was chatting with Isobel Marshall and Eloise Hall, the founders of TABOO.
What cool ladies. What an absolutely amazing initiative that they've done.
Yeah, they are so talented, so eloquently spoken. One of the best interviews I've probably heard on the show in a long time. They just know exactly what they want to say.
Absolutely. And props to Isobel for winning Young Australian of the Year. That's huge. It's amazing. You know, period poverty is one of those things where there's such little awareness around it. And we live in a really privileged place in Australia where most females and girls have access to sanitary items and pads and tampons and everything they need. You know, there's enough education in schools, but, you know, go outside of Australia and period poverty is a huge issue and there needs to be heaps more education.
Fun fact though, with the Australian of the Year awards this year. So there's 4 big ones. Young Australian of the Year is just one of them. All 4 were won by women this year.
Oh, yes. Here's to the ladies.
Here's to the ladies. That's it. Anyway, thank you so much for that story, Arsh. Coming up after the break, we'll be cracking into our main story of the evening about whether we should still be pre-ordering video games. So stay tuned. You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength with David and Jamie this evening, sparking the conversations about Adelaide you should be having. So in late 2020, Cyberpunk 2077 was released to the world. The game was hotly anticipated with huge demand for it, and the game promised a totally immersive cyberpunk world for players. But when it came out, the game was pretty bad. It was sometimes unplayable for those with older consoles, which it was made for, and only really good for those with high-spec PCs and the new PlayStation. Amila sat down with the editor of Kotaku AU to find out more about the story and ask whether we should still be pre-ordering video games.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Based on that legacy of genuine and honest communication, you've trusted us and pre-ordered our game. And despite good reviews on PC, the console version of Cyberpunk 2077 did not meet the quality standard we wanted it to meet. Please don't fault any of our teams for what happened. They all are incredibly talented and hardworking. Myself and the board are the final decision makers, and it was our call to release the game.
And what a bad call it was. While gaming developer CD Projekt Red owned up to their mistake, it was clear the company bit off more than they could chew after the release date of Cyberpunk 2077 was pushed back 3 times. I'm joined by Kotaku editor Alex Walker to dissect the practices of game developers and consumers.
Obviously, what's happened to Cyberpunk 2077 is a major one where the studio pushed really, really hard to try and get the game into a shippable state for the consoles, and then it came out and it was refunded so quickly that it's still not available in the PlayStation Store. The game plays fine on other platforms, but for people with base consoles, which the game was originally advertised for, it's certainly not the experience people thought they were going to get. And there were indications of that beforehand too, like the studio never released footage of what it was going to be like on a base PlayStation or a base Xbox, but that's also not the same as saying, hey, maybe don't buy it on those consoles kind of thing.
Has the shift to digital launches given developers less incentive to have a polished product on release day?
If you go back to the 90s was a good example, like when people were just getting access to the internet. You could release a game and maybe occasionally you could put out a patch on a demo CD for a magazine or something like that. But otherwise, what people bought on the box shelf, that was what they had. That was going to be the game for the rest of the life, maybe unless they bought an expansion. Now that's not so much the case because games get supported a long time after release. Games now released in early access or through various preview programs. So there's an understanding that game development is an ongoing thing, and especially for people who have grown up with video games, they understand that what they have today is not necessarily going to be the same game in 3, 6, 12, 18, 24 months.
So do you think that consumers who are aware of the history of a game developer, if they know the game might be janky or might have problems upon release, that they're still going to pre-order that game because they know what they've got themselves into?
The other thing with pre-orders too, though, is that pre-orders can sometimes actually be a good value argument for the consumer depending on where you are. So Australia is a really good example. We know most of the console and PC market is moving towards digital sales. Most of the publishers actually just in the last couple of weeks have spoken about going beyond 50% of sales being digital for the first time. So everyone is kind of looking in the same space in terms of everyone is buying digitally first and then maybe they buy physically. But in Australia where you've got your JB Hi-Fis, you've got your Harvey Normans, your Kogans, your EB Games, they all compete so aggressively on price that for a lot of people you can get a better initial deal if you're going to buy the game the week of the launch or day one of the launch for a pre-order because of what that competition does with price. Especially you look at Xbox, next-gen Xbox and PS5 games, they're being priced at over $100, in some cases $120, $125, $129.95, which is absurd. Like, pre-order competition between retailers can often bring games under $60. When you factor in that element of it, sure, it will be cheaper if you wait 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line. But for some people who have already built in a kind of resistance to, the things that they know about the franchise, so Animal Crossing is a good example. A lot of people had made up their minds before it came out and not even factoring in COVID. They were fans of the franchise. They knew it had been delayed. They'd seen enough information about what it was going to do. They go, okay, these are all the things that I'm happy to sign up for.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was Amila speaking with Alex Walker from Kotaku about the disastrous rollout of Cyberpunk 2077 and the greater conversation about pre-ordering video games and whether the practice is anti-consumer. Later on in the show, Amila will be sitting down with a lawyer who spearheaded a class action on behalf of consumers against Sony. But next, Hamish will let you know what the hell has been going on this week. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. We'll be getting back into our story about pre-ordering video games soon, but right now we're cracking into our weekly segment where Hamish explains what the hell has happened this week.
what the hell is going on this week? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
A select number of Aussies got their hands on doses of the COVID vaccine this week as the rollout got underway, but it was the very first recipient who stole the show, opting to give a two-fingered salute alongside PM Scott Morrison rather than the weird V signal he was spruiking. She later came out on television admitting she didn't even know who that random young man was. Well played, old lady. Sticking on COVID news for a bit, a doctor mistakenly gave two elderly patients 3 times the normal dose of the vaccine, not having performed the adequate training, and now Auntie Ruth on Facebook has all the ammunition she'll ever need. Former Liberal backbencher and general arsehat Craig Kelly defected from his party this week because big meanie Scott Morrison is no longer allowing him to peddle elephant tusks as a cure for coronavirus. How rude. Mr. Morrison has now lost the majority in the government, so in a way, thank you, Craig Kelly. And sticking with those lovely Liberals, they generously decided to increase the unemployment benefit by $3.57 a day. What can $3.57 buy you, I hear you ask? Well, that's about the cost of an extra bus ticket. Wait, no, sorry, it won't even cover that. Still, you could always grab something off the loose change menu at Macca's. I really don't know what all you people are complaining about. Meanwhile, Elon Musk lost $19 billion after investing into Dogecoin, which plummeted this week, and I lost everything. Everything. I trusted you, Elon. I trusted you. Finally, Daft Punk decided to hang up their masks after 27 years of dominating dance floors. If you're over the age of 23, there's a strong chance the duo soundtracked much of your childhood. Maybe you even had a sexual awakening to the blue anime chick in their film clips. Either way, let's pour one out in honor of the great robotic overlords of house one more time.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you for that, Hamish. As always, hilarious.
Oh, it just makes me giggle.
He just manages to put the news in such a good way.
Hamish, I love you.
That job seeker increase, though, wow.
Yeah, I know.
$3.
Yeah, wow, thanks.
You literally can't buy a bus ticket in Adelaide. And if the purpose of this increase is to make it easier give people more flexibility to go out and find jobs, they can't get on the bus to the interview.
Yeah, it just contradicts itself, doesn't it? I can get 3 frozen Cokes.
Oh, hell yeah.
That.
That's actually pretty good, though.
Treat yourself.
I forget how good the Macca's deals are sometimes.
Best way to spend $3.
Oh, absolutely.
What can you do?
And R.I.P. Daft Punk.
I know, well, because they were founded in 1993, so it's the end of an era.
End of a very
miss those
long
robot
era.
heads on the
They were
dance
around
floor.
for longer than I've been alive.
Iconic. Oh, actually true.
Sorry to our listeners who me saying that makes them feel really old. I don't mean that in a sad way, but damn.
I feel old.
Such a great band, and they will be missed from the music industry.
They really will. They're really iconic. They paved a lot of of music culture and where it is now. So robot hats off to you.
Robot helmets off.
Helmets off to you, Daft Punk.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. Before the break, we heard from Amila, who spoke with the editor of Kotaku about the terrible launch of Cyberpunk 2077. But there is precedence for these situations. Remember how bad Fallout 76 was when it launched? Well, it riled up some customers to the point that a class action against Sony was launched. Here, Amila speaks with one of the lawyers behind the ACCC's class action.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
That we are going to build something really special. We always start with the world, and this time it features all new rendering, lighting, and landscape technology. It allows us to have 16 times the detail and even view distant weather systems across the map.
With large promises come large consequences. What you just heard was Valve's director Todd Howard promising gamers that Fallout 76 was going to be Bethesda's biggest and greatest creation to date. However, on release day, it was riddled with hundreds of bugs and would crash. So when things don't exactly go as planned, what happens next? I talked to Daniel Marquette, who represented the ACCC when Sony wasn't refunding people for faulty games.
Well, I guess there's the legal and the practical issue. Legally, under the Australian consumer law, if you buy something that doesn't work properly, you have a whole range of rights under what's called consumer guarantees to seek to have the product fixed, or if it can't be fixed, or if it's so malfunctioning that it could never be fixed, you can seek a refund. And that's reasonably clear in Australia. The practical difficulty is that for things like Sony, the stream things and mobile phones, often you're actually buying the goods from a company based in Europe or America, or indeed elsewhere in the world. And as much as you can talk about your rights, there's practical reason you may not be able to actually do anything about it. That's why the ACCC has run a number of, cases to show this and to establish that overseas companies like Valve and Sony and indeed Apple are subject to the Australian consumer law.
After Cyberpunk 2077 failed to run smoothly on PlayStation games, Sony took it down from their online stores. Should these types of large conglomerates consider implementing a quality control system before the games even hit the market?
I think they should. I think one of the issues in the Sony case was that the games are actually developed by other companies and then they're put on the Sony site. So I suspect there's not as much ability for Sony to check games made by third parties, but I agree that they should be checking them. But on the other hand, in favour of companies like Sony, things get picked up as the games get operated and patches get sent out. There's always new software being sent out for Apple phones to fix things up or make things better. That is a factor in these issues, but I agree that much quality control at the start is the better.
So in 2017, Valve was fined for misleading consumers on online gaming platform Steam. Why do you think we're still seeing some of these issues crop up here?
I think it's a continual problem that it can be difficult for consumers to get refunds. The Australian consumer law is not perfectly drafted, and there's still a tendency to assume that the warranty offered by a manufacturer or the seller is all there is, and there's nothing else. So the issues pop up here, and they're probably more likely to keep popping up with companies overseas because they don't have Australian consumer law front of mind. And my understanding of American consumer law is it's nowhere near as generous as here. But hopefully, as companies like Apple and Sony and Valve cases run against them and the message comes out, that certainly the big reputable companies will start to take account of Australian consumer law.
When it comes to things like video games, there's options for pre-orders and people are often enticed because there's discounts or there's exclusive merchandise that comes with that order. Would you recommend that consumers wait to see the release of a video game and not get tempted by those types of marketing?
I would. I think I would do that, but knowing what my son's like, there's not a lot of they want it. and also, to be fair, certainly from what I can see, most games work. It's a pretty high standard product, but there will be glitches in, as people play complicated games and different things happen in the games and problems arise. But I think ideally you should see how something works and see how it performs before you buy it. But I understand that in the gaming community, people want stuff straight away. So the more research you can do, in particular, the more you can find out about what the terms and conditions and the sale are and how you might get a refund if it doesn't work before you buy something is a good idea.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was Miller speaking with lawyer Daniel Marquette about a class action on behalf of consumers. It really puts in perspective how pre-ordering video games can sometimes leave consumers burnt. Will you continue to pre-order video games? After these huge blunders, it's left us here at Wavelength wondering if it's ever worth it. And with games becoming digital and ownership being more in control of publishers and companies like Sony, it's becoming harder for us to get refunded. Let's hope developers have learnt from Cyberpunk's mistakes. Anyway, next, Wavelength explains the scandal hitting Canberra, but right now you're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. So there's been a bit of a scandal hitting Canberra this week and things are getting pretty ugly for our PM. The scandal is, of course, the rape allegations made by Brittany Higgins, a Liberal Party staffer. There's been a ton of confusing information with all sides of politics trying to score points over the issue, but we wanted to distill it down for you. So this week, Wavelength explains the scandal rocking Canberra. And a quick warning, the content of this may be distressing for some listeners.
Wavelength Explains on Fresh 92.7.
On the 15th of February, former Liberal staffer Brittany Higgins came forward with allegations that she was raped within the walls of Parliament House back in 2019. This week on Wavelength, we try to answer some of the biggest questions surrounding these unsettling claims. First of all, what actually happened? Based on Miss Higgins' accounts, the assault allegedly occurred in the early hours of March 23rd, 2019, after organising workplace drinks. Becoming intoxicated, a male colleague took her back to Parliament House, entering Defence Minister Linda Reynolds' office where the alleged rape then occurred. Miss Higgins initially went to police about the assault but eventually dropped the case, choosing to focus on her new dream job in politics. So who exactly knew about the incident? Well, a meeting was conducted in Senator Reynolds' office soon after the breach, where Brittany gave her side of events. In the very same room the incident occurred. The Department for Parliamentary Services were then notified by the AFP 4 weeks later, but didn't alert Prime Minister Scott Morrison. He continues to insist he knew absolutely nothing until February 12th this year, but the opposition has voiced disbelief that the highest office in Australian politics wouldn't have been informed of such serious allegations. Alright, well, what was done about the alleged incident once people knew? Honestly, not much. After coming forward, Senator Reynolds supposedly offered her support to Miss Higgins, but she says she never felt like the support was genuine. Senator Reynolds, who is facing calls to step down over her inaction, contests she only ever wanted to protect Brittany's privacy. Many within the coalition, however, are saying she should have gone with Brittany to the police as soon as she knew about the alleged rape. So, what's going to be done now then? As a result of Miss Higgins' allegations, 4 reviews are now taking place that will aim to improve the workplace culture within Parliament House, which has suffered long-standing accusations of misogyny. The real question, however, is if this is what's happening inside a place that houses our political elites, what's happening in places much closer to home? Sadly, this is only a symptom of a much bigger problem, and we can only hope that through the strength and courage of brave women like Brittany telling their stories, others will also find a voice to tell theirs.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That there was Hamish explaining the scandal currently rocking Canberra, and obviously these are all allegations at this point, but it's a very distressing story what has allegedly happened to Brittany. And I think what Hamish said at the very end was very important and poignant, I'd suppose.
Yeah, very, very well said.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, it's just a symptom of a much bigger problem in terms of consent culture, in terms of females finding, you know, their voice and people in general finding their voice and standing up for assault, sexual harassment. It's not okay in the workplace. It's not okay anywhere, and it's time to make a stand.
And if that story has raised any issues for you, there is help out there. Just dial 1-800-RESPECT.
You're listening to Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Right now we've got our favourite weekly segment called Heaps Good News. This week, Paul has got the goods for us for the very first time.
Yay.
Yay, Paul.
I know there's gonna be Heaps Good News on Wavelength.
Hey everyone, my name is Paul and welcome to Heaps Good News. I'm excited for this one. Dancing is back in South Australian venues as of last Friday, as long as there's social distancing in place. Along with the change came the removal of border restrictions with Greater Melbourne, which is heaps good for all the events happening in Adelaide over the festival season. With Adelaide Festival just starting this past weekend, Melbourne performers were able to come through, no stress. Elon Musk's X Prize Foundation is offering apparently the largest incentive prize in history for people who pitch carbon removal innovations. The goal is to help fight climate change and restore the Earth's carbon balance. Teams must demonstrate a rigorous, scalable solution with 1 tonne of CO2 removal per day, being able to go up to the gigaton levels. So if you're hoping for a quick $100 million, it might not be super easy, but if you've got a good idea that you can pitch, by all means. Early last week, your social media may have looked a little bare of any news, with the media bargaining law making social media platforms pay for news to show up on their site, with the majority of them removing news from your social feeds altogether. However, amendments were made and news is coming back to your feeds. That did not last very long at all, but I personally think this is a good thing because we'll continue to stay somewhat informed while we score for hours on the socials. NASA's Hubble Space Telescope has been mainly used for observing the stars. However, some of its focus has shifted towards the Earth to get some important conservation data on the largest fish in the ocean, the whale shark. Until now, marine biologists could not get enough data to help these guys out in preserving their habitat. But now the library contains more than 76,000 sightings of 12,000 sharks, which will go a long way in assisting this endangered species. And that's pretty good. And that's all for Heaps Good News this week. Hope you enjoyed and that it brightened your day a little bit, because as we know, the normal news cycle can be pretty savage. Heaps Good News is back same time, same place next week. See you later, guys.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. Dancing's back.
Dancing is back. Let's talk about that. This weekend has been huge.
Yes.
People are boogieing. It feels good. Like, it just feels like a weight's been lifted off our shoulders.
Oh, it's
like
so liberating.
Someone just opened a door and I can see the light for the first time.
Yes.
You know? Oh, guys, get your dancing shoes on. Be safe, obviously. Abide by venue rules, but just get down and boogie.
I know. Not only is it good for the soul, it's good for the clubs that can now have people dancing and enjoying these places like they're meant to be enjoyed.
Absolutely. You know, support your local venues, get out there, watch a weird fringe show, eat some jam donuts from the garden.
It's the best time of the year.
Oh, just get out.
Anyway, that brings us to the end of the show tonight. Thank you for listening.
Make sure you subscribe to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast from. You can listen back to our old episodes right now, and you'll be the first to know when tonight's episode goes up.
That's right. Thank you so much for joining me this week, Jamie. It was a pleasure to have you back.
Oh, I just love your face. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you guys next week. You're listening to Fresh.
Bye.
Wavelength.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.